Asahara had no issue ruling through fear.
People were punished, some people were even killed.
$30 million building weapons.
20 confirmed acts of terrorism.
Do we think that Shoko Asahara was a psychopath?
I think so, yes.
Welcome back to Rise and Fall. Today's episode is a wild one. This cult takes us off US shores into basically my favorite place in the world because it gave us anime, Japan.
It's also the first cult we've covered that is classified by the US government not only as a cult, but as a terrorist organization for their brutal chemical gas attacks across Tokyo that caused dozens of fatalities and hundreds of injuries.
At its height, Aum Shinrikyo, which translates to Supreme Truth, was a cult and terrorist organization that claimed to have over 30,000 followers around the world, primarily in Japan, the US, and Russia.
But how did their leader, Shoko Asahara, amass such a large global following? And how did he convince them to help him pull off acts of terrorism? To help us get into it, we're gonna say hi to someone you might remember from last season.
Shoko Asahara was born on March 2nd, 1955 in the city of Yatsuhiro in the Kumamoto Prefecture. Originally named Matsumoto Shizuo, he was the sixth of 7 children, and his parents struggled to support their family on a small income. He and several brothers attended a school for the blind that provided subsidized meals. Asahara was in fact partially blind.
Perhaps because his family didn't have money, a biographer said he became obsessed with it from an early age. He also quickly learned that he could use his charm and charisma to his advantage socially. For example, guiding blind students off campus for lunch, and in return, they bought him food. Through this, bullying, and other schemes, he supposedly had $30,000 saved by the end of high school.
After failing to get into medical school, he studied pharmacology and acupuncture and opened his own pharmacy. He sold what he claimed to be Chinese medicine, but in 1982, he was convicted of fraud for selling fake remedies to his customers. It was time to kiss that newfound fortune goodbye and embrace bankruptcy.
During this time, he realized the power of religion to get you through a tough time. Beginning to practice Agonshu, a religion rooted in Eastern philosophy, within 2 years, he abandoned his practice to found what would become his own religion, melding beliefs from Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and Christianity, and adding familiar practices like meditation and breathwork to appeal to a wide audience.
His religion began by commodifying wellness and spirituality, a lifestyle we know well here in LA.
We really do put the cult in culture.
He called his business and it was primarily a yoga school that sold health drinks. By 1987, he had about 10 followers.
Health drinks and yoga studios? I think we got a couple of those down the street.
It sounds fun right now.
I think we're both in at this point so far.
Yes.
We've been there.
Within just 2 years, they had enough influence to be granted recognition as a formal religion by the Japanese government.
I'm Dr. Natalie Feinblatt. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I specialize in helping former cult members.
So we've covered pretty much all cults just from the US in previous episodes, but can you speak to some of the societal and cultural implications of this taking place in Japan?
One of the things that I found interesting when researching this cult is that after World War II, a lot of protections for religious groups were put in place because they wanted there to be more religious groups. So they put in all these very lax rules around religious groups in terms of any group can sign up to be a religious group, and that entitles you to have certain protections. It means the police don't get to investigate if you're doing things. And I think, unfortunately, that really set the groundwork for a group like Aum Shinrikyo to come in and completely abuse all that laxness.
To build his credibility, he wrote books and traveled the world speaking about Hinduism and Buddhism, appearing publicly with religious figures like the Dalai Lama, whenever possible. Eventually, he began proclaiming he was the next enlightened one, Jesus Christ and Buddha reincarnate.
He figured from an early age that he was pretty good at getting people to do what he wanted. So I think that that's only like fuel to the fire of someone who's going to potentially become a cult leader. The earlier they start doing that, probably the worse they're going to become as they age in terms of using people and coercing them.
Many of his followers were students at elite universities who joined after hearing him lecture passionately at their school. Since his religion was rooted in Buddhism, the goal was self-enlightenment through practices like meditation, yoga, and quote-unquote psychic development exercises. He placed an emphasis on science and invention that appealed to doctors and scientists.
As soon as I heard psychic development, I'm like, excuse me?
If someone told me I could be a psychic, I'm doing it.
In exchange for loyalty, he promised followers power. Students could measure progress toward enlightenment by graduating to higher levels, climbing a spiritual ladder within the religion. It's starting to sound like NXIVM a little bit.
With a group like this one specifically, there's the cult of personality, because this was very much a group built around Shoko Asahara as the leader, the second coming, the answer to all the world's problems. So I think that there's kind of that charismatic guru thing that attracts some people in.
Undivided support for their leader was the quickest way to move up. By the third level, you were invited to live as a monk in secluded communes. You were forced to cut ties with your family in former life, and your days were filled with cleansing or mastering the body by means such as forced medication, purging, and being deprived of sleep, food, and water.
They were told to reject materialism, and the easiest way to do that would be to donate all their money to the religion. If money was not given willingly, it could be taken by threats, violence, and leaving members vulnerable without financial independence.
I think that potentially growing up really in poverty really affected his desire to kind of hoard wealth. Aum Shinrikyo had tons of money, compounds, they owned buildings. So I think that his desire to accumulate and take things from people also led to him forming this group over time.
The most zealous were given the chance to pay their way to enlightenment, spending thousands on locks of Asahara's hair, his bathwater, and to receive mysterious injections.
He charged them exorbitant amounts of money to drink his blood. Members would even pay money to drink tea that had been steeped with his hair in it, because they just wanted some of his essence inside of them. He was unfortunately smartly playing into people's desire to worship someone, to feel like they're so close to someone, people's desire to merge with this object of worship instead of kind of look at themselves and work on their own life.
I'm here for the smoothie, I'm here for the fasting and the enlightenment and getting my psychic powers, but there's no way I'm drinking somebody's blood.
That's fair. I think that's a more than reasonable line to draw in the sand. Followers believed they needed to develop their powers for the future that was coming. Asahara prophesied a catastrophic nuclear World War III that only devout members could survive. One of their booklets explained, quote, "As we move toward the year 2000, there will be a series of events of inexpressible ferocity and terror. The lands of Japan will be transformed into a nuclear wasteland. Between 1996 and January 1998, America and its allies will attack Japan, and only 10% of the population of the major cities will survive."
So can you explain coercive control within this cult?
You kind of weave a web of psychological manipulation around a person to make them believe if they leave this group, they're going to hell or they're going to die or something like that. That can keep a person stuck in a prison of fear for a very long time, even though no one is locking the door and keeping them in there.
Asahara leaned into existing theological tropes, weaving them into his religion to make it accessible, such as the Christian Book of Revelation, which focuses on prophecies relating to the second coming of Jesus, marking the end of the physical world. He would also consistently reference the Hindu god Shiva, the god of destruction and creation, a duality he would manipulate to justify committing destructive acts to save the world, such as the terrorist attacks just on the horizon.
Asahara had no issue ruling through fear, including harassment, physical and sexual abuse, and killing anyone who dared to speak or act against Aum. While many joined Asahara's ranks willingly, there were others who claimed to have been kidnapped. Some alleged they were tortured, abused, and set free only after promising loyalty or money. The unwilling were subdued through sensory deprivation, withholding food and sleep, or being forced to take drugs.
If you pretended to convert, you might be allowed to leave for a fee. In 1995, one woman reportedly got out after agreeing to sign over her property to the group. But when she missed her deadline, her brother was kidnapped.
I guess, it's understandable that people would want to stay in Aum Shinrikyo when things are good, but why do you think people stayed when things got really dark and scary?
So a lot of people probably had just bought into the stories that he was telling. They really thought that if they didn't do this, that the Japanese police were going to try to end the group, or that they should try to trigger the end of the world because that would lead to Shoko Asahara being the savior of the world. So I think that that's one part. And I think that the other people could be explained through coercive control. Even if at some point things had gotten too extreme, too dark, they had learned to compartmentalize that part of them because they needed to continue to be like good members of the group. Things got really gnarly when people were not following the rules that he set out. People were punished, some people were even killed.
In 1989, Kazuo Konya quit His lawyer, who also represented families attempting to remove their children from by court order, was murdered by the organization, along with the lawyer's whole family.
Asahara was distrustful of the Japanese government. He depicted them as a villain in his prophecies. But faced with so many attacks from outsiders, he needed power not only within his own system, but to gain it through influence and protection of government structures at large. In 1990, 25 members of the group ran for political office, but none were elected. A democratic rejection that Asahara couldn't murder his way out of. Yet.
Following their failed attempt to infiltrate the government, the group shifted focus to chemical warfare, possibly an attempt to overthrow the government, possibly as punishment for the public and their continued scrutiny. Aum Shinrikyo was said to have spent $30 million building weapons, funded by money coerced from followers, and allegedly created enough nerve gas to kill between 4 to 10 million people. Some hypothesized that they were even preparing to bring about the end of the world, as Asahara had predicted using it. You know what? I'm snitching. One thing about me, I'll snitch. As soon as I find out they got little chemicals, I would snitch on them so bad.
Aum Shinrikyo had a lot of close calls with the police. People would call and say they were up to kind of weird stuff and you should go investigate. And then when the police would get there, they would say, we're doing a religious ceremony. And then they'd have to say, okay, we can't come in, we can't do anything.
So a terrorist group just using religion as a veil.
Yeah, exactly.
Aum Shinrikyo is a little different than other cults because they used chemical means. Can you kind of expand upon that?
There are definitely other cults that eventually got to the point of stockpiling weapons like guns and explosives like the Branch Davidians did. Aum Shinrikyo was definitely unique in that they expanded into chemical weapons.
Between 1990 and 1995, the group attempted over 20 confirmed acts of terrorism, with as many as 20 additional attacks linked suspiciously to them or to copycats of their method. Their preferred weapon of choice was sarin gas, a nerve agent originally designed as a pesticide. Exposure to sarin exhausts the muscles over time by keeping them from being able to relax. The severity of the exposure may eventually force a person to stop breathing.
This just speaks to what a violent person Shoko Asahara was, and that he was really not just interested in like stopping or hurting people that he didn't like or didn't like the group, but he really wanted them to suffer. Sarin gas is actually like banned as a weapon of war because it's so inhumane in terms of the pain it causes when it kills somebody. But he was like, yeah, let's go for that.
Their first major attack using sarin occurred on June 27, 1994, when it was released from a parked truck in Matsumoto. Once again, they were targeting 3 judges overseeing a case against the group. There were 7 tragic fatalities in this instance, and while none of the judges died, all were injured, along with 500 other civilians.
A year later, they attempted 2 more major attacks. On March 15, 1995, they tried to release gas in a Tokyo train station but failed. Several days later, they had a new plan for a coordinated attack. In it, 5 members boarded trains from different lines and locations, heading towards Tsukiji Station. At nearly the exact same time, each man punctured a hole in a bag of sarin gas he was carrying. Their plan had worked. He wanted people to suffer. He wanted people to struggle. He didn't just want to wipe people out, which is so disturbing.
Among the victims that day, there were 2 train employees who heroically came into close contact with the siren in order to dispose of it and minimize the harm to others on board. In total, 13 people lost their lives due to the attack, and over 5,500 were injured, dozens of which were severe cases.
It's always a tragedy to lose a family member or someone close to you. It's different to have that loss anticipated, like someone's having an illness. To have the loss not just be sudden, but also be the result of a terrorist attack, that the goal was to inspire terror, to murder people on purpose, that's a kind of grief that can take a very long time to heal from. There's so many layers to it, not just the loss, but like how it happened, why it happened, if the people who did it are coming to justice. I obviously don't know these people's stories personally, but I feel fairly comfortable saying like that they all were traumatized.
If I try to put myself in the place of the family members, I would have nothing but violence. I just couldn't imagine.
The police had long been investigating the group, and immediately after the failed attack on March 15th, arrests had been made amongst Aum's leaders, including Asahara.
On March 22, 1995, the police raided the offices and laboratories owned by the group, as well as their training centers, finding enough disturbing and incriminating evidence to put Asahara on trial for mass murder, including materials used to make sarin and several dangerously malnourished and dehydrated cult members who refused to leave or comply with authorities.
Do we think that Shoko Asahara was a psychopath?
I think so, yes. When we get into terms like psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, there's things that are actual diagnoses, there are things that are not, they're just terms that we use in popular culture. Every cult leader has some level of like malignant narcissism. Narcissism is a spectrum, we all have it to some degree. However, when you get into like unhealthy levels of narcissism and then you get into like malignant narcissism, that is where everything's all about you to the detriment of other people. And I definitely think he fits that categorization. I would agree that there's like an added level of antisocial personality disorder where it's like you're not just using people for your gain, you actually enjoy hurting them. I don't know that you can say that about every single cult leader. There's a difference between I'm the center of the universe, I must get my needs met, versus I also want to make other people suffer.
In 1997, Asahara began what would become a prolonged 8-year trial. In court transcripts, he justified the civilian deaths by saying their souls were sent to a heavenly world and that doomsday was imminent anyway. An answer I'm sure felt great to victims' families. An ex-member, a doctor facing the death penalty for his role in the organization, begged Asahara to explain why he asked his followers to commit such atrocities. But those questions would never be answered. His testimony did not give clear answers or motivations for the attacks.
In 2004, Asahara's trial finally ended in a conviction for organizing the 1995 sarin subway attack, amongst other numerous crimes. He was sentenced to death. 12 other accomplices were also found guilty in relation to the subway attack and sentenced to death. Asahara remained in prison for over a decade before his execution in 2018. To this day, some members live on the run. As recently as 2014, a member in hiding was found, arrested, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. I think that action should always have a reaction, and I'm really happy that there was some kind of justice for the people that lost their lives that day.
I agree. I mean, there's definitely a debate to be had about the death penalty, but at the very least, the fact that there was significant legal repercussions for what happened, that's not something that happens a lot with cults.
To this day, mere mention of the cult is contentious. Yoshifu Arita, a journalist who wrote extensively on the group, believes, quote, Japan still hasn't come to terms with what happened. Individuals connected to the group struggled to be accepted again by society at large.
We use the word terrorism because that is the aim of the act, to instill terror. And unfortunately, terrorist attacks are typically successful in that. Not just at the time of the attack, obviously the people involved are being terrorized, but the society at large is also in a state of terror because it seems so senseless. Terrorist attacks can leave a society in a state of shock. I think we can liken it to 9/11 because that was a terrorist attack here. It took days to even just figure out, like, what is going on? Why did this happen? Oh my God, all these people are dead in such a horrible way. And then there's a place around trying to recuperate while also processing whatever feelings came up. It's really horrible and complicated.
Several years after the subway attack, the Japanese government passed a controversial bill limiting the constitutional rights of groups who commit indiscriminate mass murder. The bill included the right to refuse them citizenship and access social services. It also supported businesses' right to refuse them service. The scariest part is that this cult never officially disbanded. Without their leader, members went underground and rebranded themselves as a group called Aleph. Though they officially distanced themselves from their predecessor and renounced their crimes, they are still considered a controversial organization. Over the years, Aleph has broken into several splinter organizations. And between all of them, they may have tens of thousands of followers around the world. How are there still branches of this terrible cult?
You'd think that people would just not want anything to do with this anymore and just say, let's just start something different if we have to start anything at all. But no, there are still branches of it, and they say that they have nothing to do with any of the stuff that came before, but I don't really know that you can come back after like a terrorist attack.
As of October 2021, Japan's domestic intelligence agency called for a 6-month ban on the current group Aleph, though it is unclear if they have since cooperated. With someone as violent and ruthless as Shoko Asahara was, for other people that are just born that way, is there hope to rehabilitate them?
There's a debate of, are people born this way? Does life make them this way? It's probably a complicated thing with both of them. I'm a bit of an optimist, and I like to think that early intervention can help people like this. However, the longer they go on being like this, let alone successfully, the harder it gets. I don't ever like to say that anyone is like beyond any sort of help, but the odds get real low eventually.
It's hard to feel sympathy for people who are associated with something as horrific as acts of terrorism. But knowing how he coerced his followers with so much physical and emotional abuse, I have to say it makes me sad to know that they then continue to face violence in how they are received, unable to find their place again in society. And I hope those who got out can find some peace.
Another episode of Rise and Fall in the books.
And we'll see you for the next one.